Hey guys, welcome back to today's video, and in today's video, I'll be taking a look at my first 2025 gubernatorial election prediction in both of these states. Both Virginia and New Jersey are considered blue states, but ones that have competitive gubernatorial elections. Despite the fact that there are only two races, these two races could really serve as a first glimpse to the 2026 Senate and gubernatorial elections, as well as the 2028 presidential election, and offers a glimpse into how well Donald Trump is performing in the White House, according to voters. I'm going to start with Virginia, where there's only a competitive general election, before moving up to the state of New Jersey, where there's a competitive primary and general election. So first off, in the state of Virginia. Now, in Virginia back in 2021, the Republican Glenn Youngkin narrowly defeated Democrat Terry McAuliffe. However, Glenn Youngkin is term limited, which means that he could not run for re-election again. He could run in 2029 if he chooses to do so, but not for a consecutive second term. Now, the state of Virginia historically has voted against the incumbent party. So when Joe Biden was president, it voted for Glenn Youngkin, the Republican. When Trump was president, it voted for Ralph Northam, the Democrat. There was only really one exception, being in 2013, Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, won despite Obama being in the White House. But other than that, that rule has been pretty consistent. So if Trump is in the White House, it should be good news for Abigail Spanberger. Now, there is no real primary election here. Winsome Earl Sears, the Republican lieutenant governor, will face Abigail Spanberger. This is because Winsome Sears was the only person that qualified after the two other people failed to qualify according to the signatures, and thus the Republican Party is united behind Winsome Sears. While if you look at Abigail Spanberger, the Democrats are united behind her after her potential candidate opponents either withdrew or declined from running. This is because, again, it's not really that much of a competitive race. According to fundraising, Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat, has out-fundraised Winsome Sears about 3-1. But those fundraising numbers earlier don't really mean as much. Now let's look at some of the current predictions. If you look at the polling here right now, it does seem better right now for Abigail Spanberger. This might be because that she has a higher name recognition and because she is from a swing district. He's from the swing district I'm going to show you. So he's roughly from the swing district closer to Prince William County, Stafford County in this part of the state, which could make her more, known across the state due to media attention, because representatives from swing districts often get more media exposure. However, Winsome Sears is the lieutenant governor of the state, so I would expect that the Republican incumbent lieutenant governor probably has even more name recognition, so those early numbers are not the best for her, albeit this is still very early. We still see high numbers of undecided voters in many of these polls, and I can tell you that Sears is not going to get 24-26% when all is said and done, and Spanberger in many of these polls are still below 50%. But just based on the polls, these are early polls, nevertheless these are polls that support Abigail Spanberger. Not as in their bias towards Abigail Spanberger, but as in the fact that most of these polls show that Abigail Spanberger will probably win, so does the predictions. I know lead utility doesn't seem very solid, but at this stage of the election, generally a lot of the most competitive races are rated as a toss-up, so these predictors are saying that it is more likely than not gonna go Democratic. And I do agree. I think that this race is probably looking good for the Democrats, just because Republicans have Winsome Sears, who perhaps is not the best candidate. I would say Glenn Youngkin was far stronger. This is an environment where Trump is the president and Virginia votes against the incumbent, as well as the fact that Abigail Spanberger generally runs ahead of the Democratic generic ballot, not to mention that Virginia is still a blue state. Although gubernatorial elections are less polarizing, it does still means that Abigail Spanberger has the advantage because she is a Democrat. She's running in a year where Trump is the president. And again, polling and the models all show her with the advantage, so does fundraising. So as of right now, Virginia, I would consider it as lead Democratic, probably about D+4 to 5. Now we go to New Jersey, where there's a competitive primary race and a competitive general election. As I explained earlier, New Jersey has a competitive primary and general election. So let's start off with the primary, which is held on June 10th, which is only in about 5 days from now. If you are a New Jersey registered voter, you could vote in the Democratic or Republican primaries. I believe primaries there are semi-closed, which means that if you're an independent, you should be able to vote in either one. Anyways, on the Republican side here, we have Jack Ciattarelli, who was the Republican nominee back in 2021. There's still a primary, you still see a lot of endorsements for all these candidates, but Jack Ciattarelli has Trump's endorsement, which will make a big difference. And it does seem like that he has the endorsement from most of the Republican committees across the state, as well as some of these executive branch officials, a lot of county officials, 25 mayors, that should help him win. Now, there's still some other endorsements as well for other candidates, but if you look at the Republican primary polling here, Ciattarelli is approaching 50%, if not at 50% in some of the polls here, suggesting that there's not really much competition, and Bill Spadilla, the second place candidate as it seems, is still trailing by quite a bit, albeit he does have the most populated conservative county in the state of New Jersey endorsing him. It doesn't really matter though, because Ciattarelli has name recognition. He also did well in 2021. This was not expected to be a competitive race, yet Phil Murphy, the Democratic incumbent against Ciattarelli, only won by 3%. That was very underwhelming for a Democratic Party. Now, New Jersey, similarly to the state of Virginia, generally votes against the incumbent presidential party, with the only exception in recent years, in the last 50 years even, being 2021. And again, as I explained, this was definitely an underwhelming performance. Now the question is, who will be Jack Ciattarelli's running mate? I don't think that will really make a huge difference. Now we move on to Democratic primary. And there's definitely a lot more intrigue going on here. It's definitely a more competitive race. However, more recently, if you look at the polling here, you do see that Mike Sherrill, in the final few weeks closing up to this election, has taken up a lead. Now, this race was very competitive across the globe. You see that Mikey Sherrill, even right now, even though she is the clear frontrunner and she is a representative from the state of New Jersey, is only polling at about 25% if you look at some of these polls. In some of these polls, she's even under 20%. But because there's so many candidates, it does seem like that she will end up winning the Democratic primary. For example, in the most recent poll by Emerson College, she's at 28%. However, because all the other candidates are at or below 11%, she seems set to win, even though there's a very high undecided number. After all, undecideds kind of break in many ways, as they're not really going towards one direct group specifically, especially considering there are so many viable candidates. It seems likely that undecideds will kind of split, and Mikey Sherrill should be able to win. Now, this is consistent with kind of the countywide endorsements across the Democratic Party here, where Sherrill has gained the endorsements from I think 50% or so of the Democratic counties, but also from where about 60% of the population is located, as in they reside from these counties. Historically, if you get more of these county endorsements, you should be able to win. However, this time round, it's a bit different. Previously, they're kind of able to rig the ballot a little bit in the Democratic primary, as if, for example, if you get the county endorsement in that county, your name will be at the top of the ballot, and it's going to show that you kind of had the county's endorsement, which is going to help you win the primary. However, there's none of that anymore, so this will be more interesting. All of these Democratic primary candidates have a background. You know, Ras Baraka is a New York mayor who got arrested by ICE. His charges were later dropped, but he got a lot of, media attention for that. And then we look at some of the other candidates here. Stephen Fulop, he's also a mayor, I believe, from Jersey City. Although his name recognition is not as much, nationally, he is still very well known in some parts of New Jersey. Josh Gotzenheimer, another representative, representing the 5th District of the state of New York. Mikey Sherrill, she is the frontrunner. She represents the 11th. Sean Spiller, looks like he was not invited to the 2 more recent debates. Doesn't seem like he has a large chance, and Stephen Sweeney is another representative, albeit he's not polling at the highest numbers. Now, this could still go many different ways, but it does seem likely that Sherelle will be able to win, even though if I've looked at YouTube, I looked at some of these news sources, it seems like Sherelle's support is still not that high, so technically if there's some late surprise, someone else could win, albeit I do think Sherelle, probably 80% chance she wins a primary. So now on to the general election. We don't have a lot of polling yet. In fact, I don't think we have any polling at all. However, the 3 polls that have been conducted shows a lean Democratic ranking. This does make sense. Usually it's very Democratic, very liberal leaning, albeit in 2024, the presidential race was certainly competitive. Specifically, Harris only won 52% of the vote, making this the worst Democratic performance in the state of New Jersey in decades. Nevertheless, here, Democrats are still favored. New York, Essex County, still huge Democratic population. Even though Republicans have some support in the rural areas, at the end of the day, they're not able to combat the Democratic machines across the state, especially because Republicans don't win these other counties by huge margins. And the counties they do win by larger margins, for example, Sussex County, Salem County, there isn't that big of a population. Even though Ocean County, which is very conservative, has a pretty substantial population, it's just not enough to combat the Democratic areas. Realistically, Jack Ciattarelli will probably not do better than he did in 2021 because in 2021, several factors went in favor of the Republican Party. Phil Murphy was incredibly unpopular. You go on social media, you can tell that. Even though the race was not expected to be competitive, Trump was not really in the picture. Instead, Joe Biden's approval rating was tanking, as I previously explained. And Phil Murphy's not that popular. Ciattarelli was able to kind of raise a decent sum of money, even though he was definitely considered an underdog. And Phil Murphy really did take the race too seriously because he thought he was just going to cruise to victory. However, if you look at, 2025, I think Democrats are focusing a bit more on this race, and there's more enthusiasm on the Democratic side in terms of fundraising. Even though, Ciattarelli has also fundraised $9 million, it does seem like the Democratic primary field is more motivated, as in there's more money being kind of spent around, and it does seem like that the fundamentals are there for the Democratic Party, especially now with Phil Murphy not being on the ballot as an unpopular candidate, but instead Trump being the one who leads the presidency, which is going to drive out a lot of Democratic voters. I'm kind of torn on this one, but I'm going to say likely Democratic, probably D+7 if you ask me right now. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.